Rodzina by Karen Cushman, Chapter 7, Part 2. "This ain't nothing but a hungry old rat snake looking for the mice that nest in the roof," she said. "It wouldn't hurt nobody, and it ain't bad eatin'." Eatin'? Not me, no, sir. In my life I'd eaten pig's feet and duck's blood and cow's stomach, but I wasn't eatin' any snake. No, sir. Sarah Dew brought a kettle full of water from the rain barrel, and Myra Jane put in some greens, a few withered potatoes, and a chopped-up snake. "Stew," she said to me with a smile. "What else do you eat around here?" I asked her, hoping for something besides steak, stew, and hoe cakes. "Mostly jackrabbit, prairie dog, catfish, sage hen, whatever Pa and the boys find out there. In the spring we grow a few greens and things before it gets so hot that everything dries up and blows away. In the fall there's wild plums, fox grapes, and ground cherries. We most always got beans." Me, I'd starve to death out here. Who could live on snakes and prairie dogs? No roast pork with prunes, no sauerkraut, no spice cake or fresh lemonade or stuffed cabbage rolls. My stomach growled and I sighed. Mr. Clench came home around supper time. "Smells mighty good," he said. "I can always trust my girls to make me a supper fit for a king." He licked his lips and gave me a big smile as he sat down on a nail keg by the table. Sarah Dew gave him a bowl of stew, and I ladled out a cupful for Mrs. Clench. The rest of them stood around the pot and shared out the stew with one spoon. The first few times the spoon came to me, I shook my head, but finally I got so hungry from the smell and all the hay twisting and mama tending I had done, I took the spoon and had me a heaping spoonful of snake stew. It was hot and didn't taste too bad. Not kielbasa or roast pork, but a sight better than dried-up old jelly sandwiches. There was silence in the dugout until every drop was gone. After her cup of stew cooled enough, I fed some to Mrs. Clench, spoon by spoon. She didn't want to eat, kept shaking her head and turning away, so I distracted her mind by telling her about the orphan train and Miss Doctor. "A lady doctor?" she asked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Of course, right now she's just a nursemaid to a train full of orphans, and she doesn't seem to think much of the job." A lady doctor, imagine. Mrs. Clench swallowed some stew and shook her head. "Me, I wanted to be a school teacher. Thought I'd like that, all dressed up, staying in starched cottons, pointing at a map and saying, 'Now what is the name of this state here east of Wyoming?'" "Well, why didn't you?" "Married Clench at 14, had all these here babies, and soon I'd be dead as a beaver hat. That's my whole story." "Your mom and papa let you get married at 14? "My mama was dead and my papa was drunk, and no one asked if I wanted to." She looked at me. "How old are you?" "You look to be 15 or so." 12, I answered. "And I don't want to get married, or be a school teacher, or a lady doctor." I was thinking so much about me at that point that I entirely forgot to spoon stew into Mrs. Clench. "I want to go to school and come home and do homework on the kitchen table and talk about all the things that happened that day, and I want someone to tell me when to go to bed and boil eggs for me at Easter." I swallowed hard. Guess what I want is my mom and papa back. Mrs. Clench leaned back on her pillow and waved me away. "I'm plumb tired out from all this eatin' and talkin'," she said. I helped Sarah Dew and Myra Jane scrape off the dishes, spoons, and pot. "Myra Jane, if you show me where the broom is, I'll sweep up a bit," I said. Myra Jane snorted. "What hay and dry grass we got, we burn. Ain't none to waste on frippery like brooms. You better learn that right off." Perhaps this was for the best, for I had no idea how to clean that place when I couldn't tell just where the dirt ended and the house began. Leonard banked the fire and the others pulled horse blankets and quilts out of a wooden trunk. We girls wrapped ourselves in the blankets and settled on the floor, all except for Concertina and Grace, who slept in the bed with Mr. and Mrs. Clench. The boys went outside. "They sleep in the wagon," Myra Jane said. "Ain't it awful cold out there?" I asked her. "They come in if it starts snowing. They ain't stupid." Leonard stepped on me on his way out. "Why does he hate me?" I asked. "He don't hate you. He hates everyone," the girl on my right. "Lily? Glorietta? What?" I could feel her shrug. "Why, God made him, I guess." Sarah Dew snuggled up on my left side. "I want to sleep right close by you. I won't get to when you move to the bed." Why, I wondered, would I get to sleep in the bed? Maybe the children all took turns. I thought of the bed bugs and shivered. I preferred the floor. It was as noisy in the dugout that night as if the whole city of Chicago was sharing it with me instead of just one family. The wind screeched and whined. Mrs. Clench coughed. Mr. Clench snored. The girls were restless, twitching and murmuring and snorting, and when I finally fell asleep I was as restless as the rest. My dreams were part memories, part nightmares. I was walking down the stairs from our house on Honore Street, and Mr. Shogloskitz, the super, grabbed my arm and said, "You need a place to sleep, Koptia. I got a bed. Are you willing to share it?" I ran from him. The night was growing darker and colder. Delicious smells came through the open door of the tavern near Canal Street, and I stopped to sniff. "Pretty lady," whispered one man loitering outside the tavern, "come home with me, and I will feed you roasts and chocolate cakes." Another grabbed my arm and shouted, "Wrap those long legs round mine, dearie, and I will buy you beer." And he turned into Mr. Clench. I was wide awake now. I feared I was in a fix. I lay there scared and worried all night, and never did go back to sleep. The next day it rained. Mr. Clench hung around the dugout watching me and getting in everyone's way. I ignored him best as I could. I took care of Mrs. Clench and cleaned her chamber pot again, and I showed Myra Jane and Sarah Dew how to mix up some cough syrup for her, from onions and sugar, the way my mamma showed me. "Didn't nobody ever teach you this?" I asked him. "Papa said we should every once in a while tie a piece of peppered meat on Mamma's chest, but we ain't often got meat to spare," Myra Jane answered, "and we won't have to worry about that when she's gone, and you're our new mamma." A terrible fix. I took to hiding behind Clench's children as much as I could to keep away from him. I changed Grace's diapers, told stories to Lily and Loretta, and helped Myra Jane cook up a pot of beans. Big Bob took to me like ants to a picnic. Every chance he got, he climbed on my lap, stuck his thumb in his mouth, and went right to sleep. Because of my brothers, I've always been partial to little boys, their dirty little hands and the sweaty smell of their hair. I sat a long time with Big Bob in my lap and smelled his hair. Right before supper, Clench grabbed me. "Let's go for a walk, you and me," he said. I gave him the stink face, but he just laughed and pinched my cheek. "Now, none of that ornery stuff. You better learn to like me. You're going to be here a long time." "Leave me alone," I shouted. "I'm too young for this. I'm only 12. Clench laughed again and hugged me. "Don't touch me. Go away." Children stood around us looking mighty pleased at the thought of new Mama. Who was there to help me way out here? "Mama, help me, Mama." "Elgin, leave that child alone." I thought for a minute Mama had actually heard me and was coming from heaven to help. "You ain't going to ruin another girl's life like you ruined mine." It was Mrs. Clench who had pulled herself to her feet. "Why, she ain't hardly older than your own daughters. Take her back to town and find yourself someone who's old enough and willing to be a mamma to my children, or I swear I will haunt you from the grave." Mr. Clench let go of me. I think the rest of us, he was shocked to see Mrs. Clench standing up and not just lying there like she was dead already. He stalked outside and never came back all that night. I sat on the bed huddled against Mrs. Clench until morning, when Clench came stomping in. "Get your suitcase and get in the wagon," he said to me. "I don't want to waste any more time on this trip than I have to." Was he really going to take me back? I looked at Mrs. Clench. She nodded. "Go on," she said, "and find someone to boil Easter eggs for you." I grabbed my suitcase, climbed up out of the dugout, and into the wagon. We started off. The last I saw of the Clench youngsters, they were sitting in that poor patch of dirt they called a garden, breaking up dirt clods with thick knives in their bare hands. Big Bob was crying, and only Sarah Dew waved goodbye. The whole way back to Cheyenne, I sat stiff, my suitcase on my lap, ready to jump down and run if Mr. Clench seemed liable to grab me again. He didn't. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. That was just fine with me. I kept searching the distance, straining to see the first lights of Cheyenne shine out across the lonely prairie, and by nightfall I was again at the hotel. The desk clerk took me into the parlor where Miss Doctor was drinking a cup of tea and Mr. Sprott a beer, just as we orphans had suspected. "He didn't want a daughter," I told Miss Doctor, who shielded me from Sprott's fury. "He just wants a new wife for when the old one goes." "I'm sure you're mistaken," she said to me as she led me from the parlor and up the stairs. "Certainly he could see you're much too young to be someone's wife." I looked her in the eyes, but said nothing for long minutes, and finally her face grew red. Maybe she was beginning to believe me. "The old coot," she said. "I'm sorry we got you into that. I never thought that. Well, I never thought. He'll never get his hands on another orphan, I promise you." I nodded at her to let her know she was forgiven, and that I trusted her to keep her promise. Now get into bed with Lacey. We'll figure out what to do with you tomorrow." It was my first night ever in a hotel. The mattress was thin and lumpy, but the room didn't rattle, rattle, rattle all night, and no one snored or snorted, and I wasn't going to be anyone's new mamma, and the bedbugs were just regular size. Lacey pressed herself against my side. I could see her smile in the moonlight. "I was lonesome when you went," she said. "I don't like to be lonesome." "Seems to me there's a mighty lot of things you don't like," I said. "You don't like to be lonesome. You don't like to be scared. What do you like?" She thought for a minute, her face all scrunched up, and she smiled even bigger. "Full of pie," she said.